Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Star Wars video. This is going to be my review for The Acolyte Episode 1. So yes, we did get 2 episodes. I'm going to be doing an individual video for each of the episodes because I think the show is good enough that it warrants doing that. I think I would be a little bit trying to kind of maybe rush through things, trying to cover both episodes in just one video. Now, I've obviously seen both episodes, and I'm going to review episode 1, kind of utilizing some of the information that we have from episode 2, just for context, obviously, but I do want to give each episode their own time in a video. So, episode 1, this video, episode 2, probably later on today, maybe tomorrow if things don't quite work out, but I'll get to it as soon as possible. So just before we get into going through it, because I have a document here like with a bit of a recap and a bunch of screenshots, we'll go through it sort of scene by scene. I do want to give some general opening thoughts. How was it? Like I said, overall, I really enjoyed it. I think I was leaning in that direction as we got through the weeks building up to release. The excitement was actually growing. I was getting very, very intrigued by the prospect of Star Wars kind of doing a live action show in a kind of new era, like the first High Republic show, but it's separated from the novel kind of grouping of books. And I think it really worked because it's this nice blend of it's familiar in the sense that it's an era where there are Jedi around. You can tell that in a little bit we're just in the prequel era. But we're far enough away from it where it's not like everything is super, super familiar. And then obviously if you have read the High Republic, they're not obviously referencing kind of like world building events that happened in the High Republic novels because that was like 100 years ago, and then the prequels are 100 years in the future. So it is very much an era kind of to itself, but it's not that you're just completely lost, because if you have any sort of a foundation in Star Wars, a era with like, the Jedi going on missions, and especially with the focus of this show being a little bit more on the Sith. The Acolyte is a Sith acolyte. It seems like it is a Sith apprentice, I think is potentially the idea, trying to get an apprentice of their own. That kind of seems to be the overall kind of takeaway on that side of things. Because I think we're all expecting that the Sith Lord that we see at the end of this first episode probably isn't the Master Sith, and that maybe some of the true mysteries that we have in terms of like where the Acolyte is going to go, if they get like a season 2 and stuff like that, is going to be more leading us into how do we get to Palpatine, and obviously Palpatine's master is Plagueis, Tenebrous. We're kind of thinking like, okay, if this guy either has to be Tenebrous or his master has to be Tenebrous, and that's the kind of connection type stuff that we're doing here. That's going to be the big thing, and that's super interesting because, especially in recent years, we have not in Disney canon like focused on Sith Lords, the rule of 2, different Sith Lords between Bane and Palpatine. We don't have a lot of that stuff. If you read the Darth Plagueis novel, you know quite a bit, but that's legends. That's not technically canon anymore, even if some of the details are canon. Like there is a Darth Tenebrous, there is a Darth Plagueis, but for instance, the species that they are isn't actually known in canon. So it'll be interesting to see what way they go about in terms of those bigger reveals, maybe towards the end of the season, doing the proper Sith stuff overall. But the show is a mystery show, and I think it works quite well. Obviously, if you've been following marketing, some of the earlier mysteries probably have already been spoiled for you. Like if you've, especially in the last week or so, if you've watched any trailer or any like behind the scenes kind of interview style stuff with the cast and crew, you knew straight away that the big first episode reveal that like there are twins was a thing. You've known that for a while. But there are still some pretty big mysteries here in relation to like the big flashback that we're eventually going to get to as the season goes on. What specifically happened to cause this fire? How were the Jedi involved? What's happening here, really? That's super interesting. How involved, what are the Sith doing really in the background apart from just trying to get this acolyte on their side? Lots and lots of questions like that, but let's just go through it sort of scene by scene now to kind of get into the details here. So we get a bit of an opening kind of crawl. It's just kind of 3 paragraphs sort of presented to us. So we get 100 years before the rise of the Empire. It's a time of peace. The Jedi Order and the Galactic Republic have prospered for centuries without war. But in the dark corners of the galaxy, a powerful few learn to use the Force in secret. One of them, a lone assassin, risks discovery to seek revenge. So, 100 years before the rise of the Empire, this is the kind of wording that they use to describe effectively the prequel era. It is called, I think, officially the Rise of the Empire era. So they mean 100 years before the prequels, not before the Empire is in place. Because you would not say that, like, Episode 4 is the rise of the Empire. The Empire is already in place. So that's what that means. Jedi Order Galactic Republic has prospered for centuries without war. If you read the novels, like what's going on right now, it feels like we're in a pretty big sort of effectively a war situation. Maybe it's not as giant a scale of conflict, even though maybe big things have happened if you know what's going on in the High Republic stuff with the Nihil, but they probably don't want to overly confuse people by like alluding to effectively the plot across like so many different novels. So they're just saying there's been no war, even though some big scale events have actually happened. Dark corners of the galaxy, a powerful few learn to use the Force in secret. So I'm guessing this is alluding to the Sith, but also I'm guessing the witches, because we know the witches are going to come into play. That's the big kind of thing with the flashback, as we're, I suppose, going to get into in the coming episodes. But here it's specifically referring to, of course, May is what's going on here. So yeah, a lone assassin risks discovery to seek revenge. Okay, so obviously the question here is revenge for what? Because as we kind of learn over the course of this episode, she was the one who apparently caused the issue to happen. Now, obviously, the situation is a lot more complicated than just the sister set a fire type thing. We don't know the full details, but that is the setup. So pretty nice stuff to kind of jump in here on. But anyway, then we jump into the opening scene, which is basically May versus Master Indara, which if you've seen any trailer from the show, you've probably seen a clip of this. This is what they've led with to get across the idea of, you know, this is what we're doing here. We're having this kind of martial arts fight where the lightsabers aren't really involved. And yes, it turns out this is the opening scene of the show. This is the inciting incident of the show. It is the first of May's targets being killed. So Indara does die over the course of this fight, but it's interesting how it happens, because some of the details of what's going on here, it's more than just sort of by any means necessary May wants to kill Indara. Obviously, she wants to do that. But as we kind of more learn in the second episode, very specifically, she has a group of 4 Jedi that she wants to kill. Indara, Torben, Sol, and Kelnaka. So this is the first that she actually engages with effectively here. Also a part of this, based on the final scene of the episode, is that her master seemingly wants her to kill one of these Jedi without using a weapon. Not just without using a lightsaber, but without using like a weapon at all. So the way it's worded at the end, it seems to be more of a situation where like he's training her to use her Sith kind of manipulation tactics to get the win, rather than just be an ultimate combat expert, is sort of the idea here. That, you know, if effectively it's kind of almost the build up to how does Palpatine win in the end. Ultimately, it's not necessarily by just being a good fighter, because effectively he lost to Mace Windu. It was the planning, the plotting in the background that actually took out most of the Jedi. So he effectively didn't really have to use a weapon himself in combat to do that. And I think that's sort of the intent that they're going for here, is that, as we've seen so far across the opening 2 episodes, May has had to use tactics other than just straight up, I'm really good at combat, to kill her targets. So what happens here, because you can see that Indara is this martial arts expert, is that, you know, neither uses a lightsaber. Like, Indara does not use her lightsaber until things get quite serious and she feels that she has to take it out to kind of block and destroy the knives. But once May kind of points out that, like, oh, you've drawn your lightsaber, that means you're kind of set on killing me. But then we get the whole situation where she kind of bests her effectively, pulls down the mask and realizes that, like, oh, it's you. So Indara knows who May is. Obviously, she recognizes Osha, not May. But because she was there during the flashback, it could be that she specifically recognizes May. We have to wait and see kind of how involved May is in, like, everything as such. But either way, Indara recognizes her and kind of puts the lightsaber away, as in, like, I don't want to kill you because, like, you're a former Jedi. I'd like to know why you are doing this. But then we get the death of Indara. And again, like I said, it's the tactics that come into play here. It's May basically using the civilians to create a distraction, to create the opening to kill her. So she throws a knife at the bartender. Indara has to block it with the Force. There is some subtlety here in the fact that she kind of hides one knife behind her back and makes sure to focus on, like, I'm holding a knife in front of you, but I have one behind my back, and I've thrown this one at the bartender. And the distraction to use the Force to block the knife means that she's fully open for the second knife, which gets her, I guess, straight through the heart effectively here, because she just drops and dies at this point. Now, obviously, we are going to get more with Indara because we are expecting there, I'm pretty sure with this show, to not just be flashback sequences, but I'm pretty sure 1, maybe 2 of the episodes are actually going to be, like, just about the flashback. They're just going to be entirely set in the flashback based on, I think, what we've seen. It feels like it's a substantial enough incident that we need to see it in full, basically. So we are going to get quite a bit of Indara, but in terms of sort of present day Indara, this is it. So nice opening fight scene that has some, you know, interesting stuff going on, just with the sense of, like, May obviously has this choice of, like, she wants to kill a Jedi without using a weapon, but she kind of feels like she has to use weapons, otherwise she'll lose the fight and potentially be killed. So you can see moments where she does, like, try to grab the lightsaber. She's using the knives, that she's trying to create the situation where, how do I do it without a weapon? How do I actually construct that kill effectively? But anyway, then we go from May into Osha. And this is an interesting one in that, like, I'd really love to know what people's thoughts were if you did kind of, for the most part, go into the show blind and didn't know ahead of time about the whole twin thing. That, what were your thoughts upon going from this, walking away from killing a Jedi, to waking up on a proto, like, Trade Federation vessel as if nothing has happened? Like, is it immediately clear to you that this is a different person, or what's happening here? But obviously the idea is that this is May's twin sister, Osha. And we'll get some of the details on her as we go on. But yeah, she works as effectively the description for this is that, like, it's a non-droid astromech. And the Trade Federation, they call them mechneks. And now this is this illegal thing. A little bit of world building here that they go into is that the Republic have made it illegal for this to actually be a thing. Living beings are not meant to be in this sort of a position where you're outside of a ship repair. only droids are meant to be used for this. So it highlights the dealings of the Trade Federation, and that this is what they're doing. We see that the Neimoidians do view them as being disposable, effectively, almost as if they were droids. But that's kind of what's happening here. So a bit of an interesting detail here, especially when we find out that Osha is a former Padawan who has left the Order, and this is what she's kind of gone into, of course. So it's a dangerous job, but, you know, having some of the instincts of a Jedi is going to help her to do a dangerous job. That's the idea. And then we start to get into more of a sense of like, oh, the connection between the characters and what's actually going on here. There's a fire on the outside of the hull. As she goes over to put it out, she has this flashback, clearly kind of triggered by the fire and some sort of a tragedy from the past. And then she looks up as she puts the fire out and sees a Jedi ship arrive aboard the Trade Federation vessel. So we get a bunch of references to this flashback sequence, again highlighting that it's going to be super significant to actually go into this. We know from the trailers we're going into this in quite a lot of detail. Next, we have the introduction of at least one of these characters is kind of significant. I have no idea if Tassi Loa is going to play any sort of a hugely significant role in the series overall. I probably have to go back and watch some of the trailers to see is she there in some of the shots where like everyone ignites their lightsaber. But Yord is going to be one of our main Jedi characters here. So he's been a knight for the last 2 years, but he still feels maybe a little bit like inexperienced in the role. That like he's still, the characterization of him seems to be that he's kind of by the books. He's trying to impress people. He's trying to come across as a master, but maybe still feels a little bit inexperienced and is kind of struggling with the correct approach to take to a certain degree. He's maybe a little bit too by the books, but he's trying to stick to the books for like, you know, obvious reasons. And yeah, Tassi seems like a pretty good, devoted Padawan who knows what to do. So it'll be interesting if they explore this master-apprentice kind of dynamic more as we go on. And it's also our first proper look at like more classical kind of High Republic style Jedi robes. Because in Dara, for the most part, was wearing stuff that felt like this basically is what becomes prequel era Jedi robes. Her kind of tunic effectively was slightly fancier than the sort of stuff that like Obi-Wan or Qui-Gon would wear, but mostly the same and very different than the kind of whites and golds that is kind of traditional during the kind of High Republic era, where it's a lot more fancy kind of what's going on here. So yeah, they're here, and initially the Trade Federation kind of think that like, oh, are you here because it's illegal for us to use mechanics, like living mechanics on the outside of the ship? But no, they're not really here for that. But they are here to see Osha, who is one of them. This is where we get the reveal that she's a former Jedi. We also get her second name, Osha Anaseya. So obviously this reveals that this is also May's second name as well, Anaseya. And we, of course, if you've seen the marketing material, you know who kind of Mother Anaseya is from like the trailers, which is going to be, I guess, revealed in the flashbacks when we get the witches properly like introduced. There's an interesting moment here in terms of like, we obviously know that this show is going to explore the idea of the flaws of the Jedi to a certain degree. Because we're Sith focused, it makes sense that we're going to see some criticism of the Jedi. But the idea that it does seem like the Jedi are very much using the idea that they can manipulate people's minds with the Force as a bit of a threat here. So it's like, instead of discussing things, he's just like, I'm going to do it to you. And then one of the other people is just like, she's over in this quarters. Just go. We don't want to mess with you. There is a little bit of that kind of Jedi intimidation aspect going on. But he's trying to solve the mission, and he doesn't actually do anything. So it's like, minor criticism, but let's see what happens here. But anyway, then we get to the meetup with Osha, of course. And what's interesting here is that, like, the way I have it worded here is that they accuse her of killing Indara. But it's actually like we learn all this stuff first, and then they're like, Indara was killed. It was you, basically, as far as we were told. The evidence is very, very strong. These two do know each other, obviously from, I guess, earlier years during their training, so they're somewhat familiar with each other. She seems to view it as it being a little bit of a surprising thing that he has ended up passing his trials, even though it was 2 years ago. So maybe giving a sense that like there is maybe more to this character, and sort of the presentation of him trying very hard is maybe to make up for the fact that he's maybe not the absolute most talented. But especially in like episode 2, it does feel like he's pretty solid. Like he sticks to the plan, and even when his plan gets overruled, he like goes ahead with the other plan. So I don't think he's just being presented as being this kind of deeply flawed Jedi. It's like, you know, he's still young-ish, finding his way into more of a master style position. That's kind of the presentation there. There's a nice little bit of nuance, I think, with the presentation of him, which I think is interesting. And yeah, we get some of the year details here. So she left the Order 6 years ago. When she joined the Order, she was 8, and then later Sol says that it was 16 years like ago when like the big event kind of happened. So, you know, you can figure some stuff out kind of from there. And so yeah, he also mentions that like maybe part of the reason why this has happened is because you were too old to be trained. You joined the Order while you were in mourning for the loss of your family, highlighting that the fire-related tragedy resulted in the loss of Osha's whole family. And obviously, like, before you know the whole idea of the twins, you're kind of like, is this a multiple personality type thing? So this is the same person, potentially. But then if you are leaning more towards the idea of maybe it is twins, you're kind of like, well, why are we not accounting for the fact that her whole family would include her sister being killed? What's going on here? How did this happen? And that is one of the mysteries presented throughout this episode, is the idea that it seems to be a pretty known thing that May died. Like, people saw May die, but she's still alive. How? How has this actually happened? And then they accuse her, and it's more like, you know, she denies it. She's like, I was on the ship the whole time. But they do feel that she kind of has a motive. They say that, like, what was it? Indara didn't agree with her being trained because she was too old. But Osho kind of counters with the idea of, but I chose to leave the Order by myself. Like, it doesn't come across as there's this kind of almost, like, dishonorable discharge from the Jedi or anything like that. She just chose to leave after a certain point. But we don't know the reasons for that, either. The only real thing you maybe get in this whole episode when it comes to that is she doesn't seem to be able to use the Force anymore, or there seems to be some sort of a block related to that. But otherwise, Sol presents the idea that she was actually devoted and I guess pretty skilled. So what happened to, you know, curtail her training? Did she encounter this block and she just chose to leave because she wasn't progressing? Or did something cause that block to happen? And then we're kind of getting into the idea of, even though it seems like she finds out that May is alive here, maybe in the back of her head, did she maybe always sense that her sister was alive and that created all these regrets? Who knows? But anyway, she is arrested after this. We do get the bartender confirming that it is her super directly, that he sees someone who looks identical to the person who spared him. Actually, I think I forgot to mention that in the earlier scene here. She goes to kill the bartender, but does stop when she sees that he has a child. So May does have a heart, and this obviously relates to the idea that her revenge is obviously about something that happened in her past that I suppose for her maybe resulted in the death of her sister, because it kind of comes across like, I think I have to watch episode 2 again, but like the sisters both thought the other sister was killed in whatever happened here, and they both have maybe different interpretations of what exactly happened here. So her being merciful to children, fits in line, I think, with what's going on. But anyway, then we get the introduction of Master Soul here, instructing younglings. Again, this was from some of the obvious early trailers when Master Vernestra Rwoh arrives. So this is the only High Republic character who book readers actually know about, who, if you're only watching this show, you won't know about. Now, obviously, the character is 100 years older than she is. She's a teenager in the books. She's like 100 and whatever here. Effectively, book readers don't really know this version of the character because it's so much time has passed. She's obviously in a quite, she's a veteran master kind of position here. She seems to be kind of running the kind of ops on this mission, but she's not like part of the council potentially, or is... I suppose we have to wait and see that when we maybe get more with Vernestra. Are we going to find out her exact position within the Jedi at this point in time? But obviously with her, they don't do any obvious references to events from the books or anything like that, because like I said, it was 100 years ago. Otherwise, I think the presentation is pretty good as just a kind of, in a way, the master who has like seen it all. Obviously there are older characters, but they don't want to, I suppose, bring Yoda in, or maybe even some of the other characters who would still be around, at least right now. So Vernestra is going to be our kind of veteran Jedi for this show. But anyway, yeah, the details that come out here is that he already knows that Indara has died, but now it's like, we've got the suspect. It is Osha, your former Padawan, and the evidence is strong. And the big thing that comes out of this is obviously he's stunned by this, but Vernestra's kind of like more than expected, that like you are attached, you are like deeply connected to her. And obviously he doesn't believe that this could be the case. He doesn't believe that she could possibly do this. This is where we get the idea that like, me and Indara saved her from a fire on Brendok, the planet where she's from. So connecting things a little bit more, gradually learning more details about this. An interesting line from Vernestra's perspective is that she does a couple of times mention the idea of make sure to keep things like under the radar. We don't want people knowing about basically what this mission is about. So discretion is the important kind of word here. That they both agree that like if it becomes public that a former Jedi killed a Jedi, that could be politically used against us. And it's like, whoa. Well, what do you mean by that? That's very, very interesting. And I'm wondering, is this where we're getting into the idea of like the Jedi are somewhat free to act on their own in this era, but what we might see as a result coming out of the end of this series is some of this stuff, the event from the past coming out, it becoming public, and the Senate agreeing that they should have like more control over the Jedi. So the Jedi lose some of their freedom to act because this comes out publicly that they went a little rogue without the oversight of the Senate. And of course, this is the big thing that creates a lot of issues as we go into like the prequel era, is how it feels like the Jedi are not really able to do stuff on their own without the Senate agreeing to send them somewhere in the first place. So the fact that, you know, Vernestra is in any way like agreeing to kind of like secret kind of private Jedi missions is a bit of an interesting point. It makes me think back to like the High Republic books in terms of like, are there situations where the Senate is like ordering the Jedi places? And I'd have to kind of go back and read some of those books to get more of a sense on how much control there is, because obviously the Jedi still work with the Republic and will still ultimately take missions from like the Senate and stuff like that, but it doesn't seem like there's as much direct like we work for you type stuff going on as there is in the prequels. Then we get there's a prisoner escape sequence that happens here. This one's not the most interesting scene because it's just like they have a guy who seems to have like cybernetic implants, and they use him to kind of take over the droids because there's no other humans on the ship. It's completely run by droids. So they free everyone except Osha. Most of the other escapees leave on one of the drop pods, escape pods. Osha frees the final prisoner who had this kind of thing over his mouth that kind of kept his mind kind of calm or something like that. And then he takes the last escape pod. So Osha actually crash lands on the planet Karlak on the full ship, like on her own. Because the final prisoner, even though he kind of thanks her in a way for like taking the thing off him and allowing him to escape, does betray her. So that's the point here. So she's on her own on Karlak, and of course she effectively hasn't participated in the escape attempt, but it's going to make her look quite bad, obviously. Then we get the introduction of this is Jackie, who is Sol's current Padawan. And then another scene with Vernestra. So the idea of this sequence here is, of course, we get the whole idea of Sol. He looks at the hollow of Osha. Jackie asks about it and is like, hey, as Jedi, we're not really meant to dwell on the past. But Sol says that, you know, memories are lessons that basically we have to learn from the past and what, you know, happened. So that's going to be, I think, a really big thing. Because with Sol especially, I think you can tell he is a character who is very defined by what happened on this mission, and it's going to be so interesting to see what happened exactly. So Vernestra basically is like, hey, we got the prison escapees, everyone except Osha. Sol uses the force on the individual guy, basically, as she helped, and he reveals that he betrayed her, and they basically find out that, oh, she went basically down with the ship. We don't really feel she's survived, but Sol is convinced that she has, and is like, I want to do it. It's my responsibility. I will take full accountability for this. Let me take this mission. And she agrees. So he gets a small team, and it's just going to be himself, his Padawan, and whoever, Yord. That's the name. I was going to say Yoel, but I was like, no, that's not it. Yord. So yeah, that's what happens there. There's a quick setup scene for the idea that on the ship, Osha has a vision, which ends this first part of it ends with the idea that we get the idea of, oh, it's like a younger version of herself, or it's a younger version of her sister, but they don't quite reveal it yet. Then we get the scene where Yord is brought on board as backup, and we just get the slight dynamic that Jackie is kind of like, tell me our backup isn't Yord, because I know exactly what he's like. And then when they come in and they find him like still changing, and there's a big sense of like, oh, this guy, like he's maybe a little bit too focused on his appearance. She, for whatever reason, doesn't overly agree with his approach. And there's a little bit of, as we go through this into episode 2, a sense that they have two different approaches ultimately, where Yord is very, by the book, this is the logical way to do it, whereas Jackie feels more like she has a bit of that kind of like prodigal kind of energy to her, where she has clever creative plans that don't get bogged down by the rules but are still sort of by the rules, and it's sort of like Yord in a way could learn from the younger character to be better type thing. They're being careful to not have kind of Yord come across as like jealous or anything like that when it comes to Jackie. It's kind of more like he realizes he needs to kind of step up himself. So it will be interesting to see what happens with regards to that. Like, is he going to charge into a situation and something really bad is going to happen because he's trying too hard? Or are they going to turn the corner in a way with the character and have him kind of find his place type thing? Is an interesting one. But then we get the full vision here, which is super, super interesting. So the vision full on, I think, goes to Brendok, and it's on fire. We see all this sort of weird changing stuff happen where, of course, like Osha switches into being her younger self. May is, of course, her younger self the whole time through. May sings this kind of song. It's kind of like a rhyme. You're with me, I'm with you, always one, but born as two. Which is like the first time, I just kind of completely went past it. Like, I'm not sure what they were talking about there. But focusing on the dialogue, I'm kind of like, that's a bit on the nose almost. So in terms of like, always one, but born as two. So twins, they are separate beings, but they're always connected. And what's happening over the course of this vision is a full-on connection. Like, May is interacting with Osha in this thing, because this is confirmation for Osha that May is alive, and basically vice versa. So I think they're teasing some sort of a Force dyad type thing, especially because we're getting into the idea of like the witches and the whole idea of like the mothers and stuff like this, and what's happening here. How did May come to the attention of the Sith? And the Sith have as we learned from kind of like the sequels to a certain degree, a bit of a focus on trying to find like a dyad. So is that what we're doing here? Because this feels like more than just they're twins, so they're especially connected. This is a full-on special Force style connection. Like, this is reminiscent of Rey and Kylo in the sequels, of like what their Force talks were able to kind of be like, where they have these vivid visions and they can communicate across the stars and stuff like this. This definitely seems to be what's happening here, and it obviously places a lot of importance on both of these characters in terms of like their history, their origins, and like you know, is it just a coincidence, is it random, or was there some sense on Brendok of like, we can force a Force dyad to actually happen? So that's the big interesting point. So yeah, we get the reveal that, you know, obviously Osha thought she was dead, but she does ask, did you kill Indara? And May just says, yes, I will kill them all. And Osha wakes up at this point, revealing that the whole thing was a vision the whole time through. But interesting stuff as we're getting right towards the end of the episode here. Jackie asks Sol to basically give us a bit of an update on what's going on. So that 16 years ago, he was posted on Brendok. Apparently, Osha's sister, so May, started a fire that killed Osha's family. He does reveal at this point Osha had a twin, a detail that is not in the sort of Jedi file for Osha. So this has been kept a secret apart from the people who were there, effectively. And you can tell that Yord, and especially Jackie, both hear this twin detail and are like, wait, this kind of explains a few things. But Sol is like, no, she died. I saw her die. There's a distraction as they're coming in for the landing, but then we cut back to Sol, and this is the screenshot here. As they leave, he just looks like wistfully off into the distance, as in, did I see her die? Is it a lie that I saw her die, that something different happened? Obviously something, the Jedi made mistakes in what happened on Brendok and this whole sequence and how it happened, as we learn about more in episode 2, which we'll get to in the next video, obviously. So yeah, Jackie is the one kind of being like, hey, twins, that could explain some things. And then we get to the final few sequences. So on Karlak, the Jedi follow Osha. They confront her on the edge of a cliff. Of course, this is where we get the scene from the trailer where she says, I didn't do it. She slips off the cliff in the kind of confusion, but Sol saves her in a very cool moment, highlighting his strength in the Force, that she barely falls. Like, she just literally goes like this, and he stops her before she even, like, properly moves down the cliff and just brings her back up. And immediately you get the sense that he does believe her, and we get the reveal. Osha says May is alive, and he does believe this to be the case. And because of this, he's not going to keep her as a prisoner they're gonna watch her, but like they're not gonna put her in the binders or whatever they're called in Star Wars. And then the final scene, they make sure that the first episode ends with a little bit of Sith stuff. So May visits her master. I think she refers to him as that in the next episode, or she wants him to be her master if she gets, I suppose, picked, if she passes the test to become his actual apprentice. So this is a Sith Lord. Given that we don't have a name, we don't really know the details, I think the only thing we can go off is like we have to assume this is the Sith Lord of this era. The timing of this show means that Palpatine hasn't been born yet. Even Plagueis should only be like a teenager if they keep the fact that he's immune and he's kind of slightly more long-lived. So, like I said at the start, if this is any of the sort of quote-unquote known Sith Lords, it's Darth Tenebrous. But more than likely, and I think almost from the interviews you get the sense that this is the Sith apprentice of the Rule of Two, not the master. This is the apprentice trying to find his own acolyte to then go after his master to become the actual master himself. So this is him admiring the kind of master's power, trying to get it for himself. So what this character says is, he says the Jedi live in a dream, and it's one that kind of everyone shares. That if you attack a Jedi with a weapon, you will fail. An acolyte kills without a weapon. Instead, they kill the dream. And this is where he ignites his crimson red lightsaber. So, interesting. This is obviously the idea of highlighting the idea of her mission is kill a Jedi without using a weapon, effectively. But it's also this advice of effectively, like I said at the start, like kind of it not being all about combat, it being more about kind of political maneuvering, manipulation, killing the dream that they have, like as in creating a situation where the Jedi are in a bad situation and stuff happens to them because of that you don't have to directly attack them yourself. Like, obviously still be capable of doing that, but like there's a right way to do this effectively. Like that there's a reason that the Sith plan since Bane has not been to just attack the Jedi. Because there's only two of them, that would be a disaster for them. That the plan is more subtle and intricate than that, and I think that's what we're trying to get into. And I'm super interested to see, as the episodes go on, how much focus this Sith Lord character actually gets. Because we know we're building up to this character comes into play, gets involved in the action. There seems to be a fight scene involving this character. So what's the result kind of coming out of this when it comes to this? To me, the worst thing that this show could do would be revealing that this is not the Sith Master or the Sith Apprentice. That it's just another guy and there's multiple layers to get back to the actual Sith Lord. Unless they do a reveal like that, like really well, where they actually do show us the Sith Lord, I do feel this probably has to be the case where it's maybe more of the Sith Apprentice of the era doing his own thing. But we'll see what happens here. There's so much potential depending on how this goes. Because I really want to get the Darth name of this character, if that is in fact a thing that's in place, because I'm guessing it probably would be a brand new Darth name if that is the case. So there are my thoughts on the Acolyte episode 1. I think a really, really good setup. The episodes are maybe a little bit shorter than I would maybe perhaps like. Like this one ended up being like, what, 36, 37 minutes? Maybe more like 35 when you cut off the kind of intro and outro of the episode. Whereas I think you maybe more like it to be at least 40, a little bit over 40. But I would not say as I went through these two episodes that I overly noticed the episodes like feeling super short. Like it felt like they packed a lot in. And that I think is a good sign, because I think other Star Wars shows I do end up clock watching a little bit more, because it's like, I'm not sure if you have enough here, or you've done enough to fill out that time. But with this, it was just like, no, that was a good episode. Like you accomplished quite a lot here, and there's more episodes to come. The second episode does a good job at adding on to this, as we'll get into. So I don't have any giant criticisms, I would say, coming out of this, especially with the first episode. I think there's enough stuff going on here that I'm honestly very, very interested. I think production quality feels very good, where it seems like there's a lot of like practical sets. There's bits and pieces of CG, of course, but it comes across, I think, pretty well overall. The acting seems very good as well. Given that we're not, at least currently yet, dealing with the really in-depth, kind of almost political themes that maybe like Andor has. I think for what's happening here, the acting quality is like very, very good. So I don't want to make some statement like, oh, this is like Andor with the Force, but like I think it's leaning in the direction of like, no, this is one of the more, it feels like, high quality, nicely produced Star Wars shows that we've had, that feels like they've learned from some of the other shows, that has made this one come across better than some other stuff recently. So yeah, gonna wrap it up there. So in the comments, let me know what your thoughts were on The Acolyte episode 1. But otherwise, like I said, episode 2 review will be either later on today or tomorrow. So let me know your thoughts below. But that has been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.